Social psychology and human values. Social psychology, a field dedicated to understanding how individuals' thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are influenced by the presence of others, is deeply intertwined with human values. These values shape the work of social psychologists in both evident and nuanced ways. To explore how values permeate this field, it's essential to understand that social psychology is not merely a collection of findings, but a framework of strategies designed to answer pressing questions. Much like in the legal system, where personal opinions are inadmissible, science strives for objectivity, relying on evidence to determine outcomes. However, one must ponder whether social psychologists can genuinely maintain objectivity. Being human, their personal convictions about what is desirable and how people should behave inevitably seep into their work. This raises a critical question: can social psychology truly be considered a scientific discipline if it is influenced by personal values? Obvious ways values enter psychology. Values significantly influence the choice of research topics in social psychology. Historical and social contexts have consistently guided these choices. For instance, the study of prejudice surged during the 1940s amidst the rise of fascism in Europe. The 1950s, characterized by conformity in fashion and thought, led to studies focused on social conformity. Similarly, the civil unrest and rising crime rates of the 1960s spurred research into aggression. The feminist movement of the 1970s brought a wave of studies on gender and sexism, while the 1980s saw a renewed focus on the psychological dimensions of the arms race. Moving into the 1990s and the early 21st century, there was a heightened interest in how individuals respond to diversity in culture, race, and sexual orientation. This progression underscores that social psychology is a reflection of social history, as noted by Kagan 2009. Values also vary across different cultures, influencing the focus of social psychological research. In Europe, national pride is pronounced, with Scots distinguishing themselves from the English and Austrians from the Germans. This cultural context has given rise to the theory of social identity emphasizing group distinctiveness. Conversely, American social psychologists have tended to focus more on individual processes, examining how people think about, are influenced by, and relate to others. Australian social psychologists have integrated theories and methods from both European and North American traditions, illustrating a blend of cultural influences on the discipline. The type of people attracted to various academic disciplines is another way values influence social psychology. At any given educational institution, students majoring in the humanities, arts, natural sciences, and social sciences often display distinct values and motivations. Social psychology and sociology, for example, might attract individuals more eager to challenge tradition and shape the future rather than preserve the past. This selection process further entrenches specific values within the discipline. Additionally, values are an explicit focus of social psychological analysis. Social psychologists investigate how values form, why they change, and how they influence attitudes and actions. Despite this, the discipline does not dictate which values are right, maintaining a stance of inquiry rather than prescription. Not so obvious ways values enter psychology. Beyond the obvious, there are subtler ways in which values infiltrate social psychology, often masquerading as objective truth. 1. The subjective aspects of science. It is now widely acknowledged that science is not purely objective. Scientists do not merely observe nature, but interpret it through their own mental frameworks. This phenomenon is evident in daily life as well. For instance, most people cannot initially see a Dalmatian sniffing the ground in a certain picture until the idea is suggested to them. Once this preconception is established, it shapes their perception to the extent that it becomes difficult not to see the dog. This illustrates how our minds work. We perceive the world through the lens of our preconceptions, which can lead to a biased interpretation of reality. Scholars within a particular field often share a common viewpoint or cultural background, leading to unchallenged assumptions. These shared beliefs, known as social representations, can be significant yet unexamined. Occasionally, outsiders challenge these assumptions, as feminists and Marxists did in the 1980s, highlighting biases within social psychology. Feminist critics pointed out biases such as the political conservatism of scientists who favored biological explanations for gender differences, while Marxists highlighted biases towards individualism and competitiveness. However, critics themselves are not free from biases, as seen in progressive social psychologists' reluctance to acknowledge group differences, assuming stereotypes are purely products of racism. This underscores that preconceptions influence our interpretations significantly. 2. Psychological concepts contain hidden values. Recognizing that psychology is not entirely objective implies that psychologists' values influence the theories and judgments they support. For example, psychologists may label people as mature or immature, well-adjusted or poorly adjusted, mentally healthy or ill. These labels reflect value judgments rather than objective facts. Defining the good life values shape our ideas of the best way to live. Abraham Maslow, a personality psychologist, described self-actualized individuals based on his own values, selecting a sample that reflected his personal ideals. Had he chosen different examples, his description of self-actualization would have varied. Professional advice. Psychological advice often reflects the personal values of the advice giver. Mental health professionals, child-rearing experts, and psychologists advocating for living free of societal expectations express their values. Western advice typically emphasizes individualism, while non-Western cultures may focus on collective well-being. Forming concepts. Hidden values influence research-based concepts. For instance, the same set of responses in a personality test might be labeled as high self-esteem by one psychologist and defensiveness by another. The chosen label reflects underlying value judgments. Labeling. Everyday language and psychological labels often conceal value judgments. Terms such as bashful versus cautious, terrorist versus freedom fighter, or welfare versus aid to the needy carry implicit judgments. Such labels shape our perceptions and convey specific values. The importance of diverse perspectives in science. Acknowledging that human thinking involves interpretation does not diminish the value of science. Instead, it highlights the need for diverse perspectives in scientific research. By engaging researchers with varying biases, science can better check and balance these biases, striving for a clearer understanding of reality. Systematic observation and experimentation serve as tools to refine our perceptions and mitigate the influence of subjective values. In conclusion, values are deeply embedded in social psychology, influencing the choice of research topics, the cultural context of studies, and the interpretations of findings. While objectivity in science isn't ideal, the recognition of inherent biases underscores the importance of diversity and critical scrutiny in scientific inquiry. By continuously challenging our assumptions and refining our methods, social psychology can navigate the complex interplay of values and strive towards a more comprehensive understanding of human behavior.